there is a philosophical...
There isn't much of a breathing space between one need and the next for an organisation like Oxfam. Take the last decade, for instance. The 70s opened with one major human tragedy and ended with another.
Bangladesh, a nation born out of blood, born just 5 days ago when the Pakistan army surrendered to invading Indian troops. Bangladesh, until then East Pakistan, is the home of 75 million Bengalis. For them, the past 12 months have been grimly historic. This year, the prophet's year of killing, has led irresistibly to the breakup of the old state of Pakistan and to the birth of the new Bangladesh. It began 12 months ago when the worst cyclone for a century struck the Delta region and inflicted up to 1 million deaths. But that was just the beginning in East Pakistan. In March, when the government based in West Pakistan believed that Bengali nationalism, led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, threatened their control, the army was used to devastate the country, starting a civil war. 1 million people, mostly Bengalis, died in the massacres which followed. Severe flooding in September destroyed even more homes and crops, reinforcing the starvation caused by the breakdown of a state at war with itself.
The horror began, of course, before Pol Pot. Cambodia's peace and fragile neutrality were destroyed in 1970 by a secret war launched by President Nixon and Dr. Kissinger in violation of American law and in defiance of Congress. By 1973, American bombers had dropped the equivalent of 5 Hiroshimas on Cambodia. Out of this inferno came Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge, whose forest revolution exploited the devastation. A civil war began, resulting in 1 million dead and wounded.
My wife, my son, my daughter, anything before.
They were killed?
Yeah, killed. We have only my child, only one.
How many children were killed?
5.
5 children?
5 children. Yeah.
How were they killed?
He don't give to any to eat.
I see, they starved.
2 months anything with anything. No rice, no soup, no anything.
If the 70s were complex and demanding of Oxfam, the half-dozen people here in Oxford who founded what they called the Oxford Committee for Famine Relief in 1942 had just one simple issue: how to ease the suffering in war-torn Europe. As one of those founder members, Canon Milford looks back.
Very little was known about what was going on in Nazi-occupied Europe, but what we did know concerned us deeply. Through the Quakers we heard that many people were dying in Greece of starvation, partly owing to the effects of the Allied blockade of Europe. So backed by Professor Gilbert Murray and others, a few of us got together here in the old library of St. Mary's, where I was vicar, to see what we could do. We asked the government if a way could be found to ease that blockade. And when they declined, we eventually took a petition to the Ministry of Economic Warfare, signed by several thousand people in Oxford, asking that controlled relief to Greece in particular should be allowed. It was pointed out that if we helped to feed the starving people of Greece, the Nazis would not have to do so, and this would help their war effort. Meanwhile, we had started collecting money for Greece to be used as opportunity offered.
And that opportunity grew dramatically as the war ended. Throughout Europe were millions of displaced people needing help. And here at home, the public used the new charity as a way to give it. clothing was a priority. From depots in London and Manchester, 1,000 tons were sent out. But refugees were not confined to Europe, and soon Oxfam had other problems, like the plight of the Arabs after the partitioning of Palestine in 1947. And the war for independence in Algeria. The Congo, 1960. War and famine on a huge scale. One of the turning points in Oxfam's history. 1968, and more fighting and suffering. This time the conflict between Nigeria and Biafra. These children were the lucky ones, orphaned and homeless, but taken from the bush to comparative safety. And through it all, those ever-present natural disasters, which have always been Oxfam's concern, and still are. If Oxfam has grown to be a household name today, it is because great numbers of caring people were prepared to trust a little-known group in Oxford as a channel for their concern. By the mid-1960s, 20 years on from that simple beginning in 1942, Oxfam had become a lively and confident organization, enjoying popular support. But that confidence was destined to fall apart when, in 1971, the enormity of the East Pakistan tragedy began to dawn. In a few months, 10 million people fled to India. Oxfam was caught unprepared to respond adequately. There had been nothing like it before. Shelter, for instance, was an urgent need. So, experiments were started with various kinds of shelter, using all that 20th century technology could devise. Another problem tackled was sanitation. This is cholera, a disease transmitted through polluted water and endemic in East Pakistan. Cholera germs like fresh air, so a way had to be found of cutting it off. In 1976, an answer emerged capable of being packed and shipped in one case. It was a self-contained sewage system, able to cope with 1,500 people each day. Large butyl tanks, originally designed for military use, were connected to a series of lavatories, placed at a higher level and enclosed. The tanks sealed off the contents from the air and killed the cholera vibrio. After a settling period, a safe liquid could be drained away and the solids remaining used as good and safe fertilizer. Today, the people of East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, have the benefit of this successful experiment. And not only Bangladesh. The emergency relief work of Oxfam is coordinated in a small disasters unit, housing tools and equipment, pre-packed blankets, clothing and medicines, all available for immediate dispatch. The help given cannot hope to match the need, but specialization like this ensures a quick and relevant response. Disasters which make the headlines, however, are incidental to Oxfam's main objectives, for it was realized early on that the everyday lives of millions of people needed long-term commitment. One initiative from the early 70s was taken in Mexico.
In the barren desert 100 miles from Mexico City lives a community of Otomi Indians. The lack of water has kept them for centuries in grinding poverty. Their women waste hours each day just fetching water to cook and wash with, let alone enough to irrigate the crops. Recently, the Indians began a self-help project to build an irrigation channel. But it was foundering because though they could dig with picks and shovels on the flat ground, they couldn't blast their way through rocks. An application for help came to Oxfam, and they provided the drilling equipment to bore holes for dynamiting the rock. No great expense, but an enormous encouragement to the people's plans to bring water to their lands.
Leslie Kirkley, Oxfam's first director, tells how this work began.
The first development decade declared by the UN had an impact that the second, and heaven help us, the third, never had. Back in the 60s, the world seemed so much more confident that it could achieve something. Nearly every country had its Freedom from Hunger Committee, and of course, Oxfam played its part in the one set up in the UK. We decided to commence our work for that special campaign in what were then known as the High Commission territories in southern Africa, Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland. So we sent off an ex-forestry man from Nigeria to find out the best way we could help. He came back with £250,000 package for development. That was big money for us in those days. So we promptly asked him to return, set himself up in the area, and see that the money was spent in the way that donors intended.
That was the first field director. Today there are some 50 field staff living in areas where Oxfam's help is concentrated. Their job has changed over the years. They still have the overall responsibility of recommending and checking what Oxfam does in a particular country, but the approach has changed. Brian Walker, Oxfam's present Director General, explains.
As we gained a deeper understanding of development and a greater trust in the people we are working with, so we have tended to give more grants to local groups, getting deeper into the grassroots where the people themselves can decide on their own priorities rather than outsiders like us imposing our ideas on them. Giving an ox plough so that people can till the land sounds like second best to us in the West. We are used to tractors. Yet when land holdings are very small, a very strong case can be made for the traditional ways. Adopting a local approach to local needs means that local people have a quicker understanding of those needs. So now we recruit local people to work with us in this field. We're always deepening our understanding. Political and economic processes are making it harder and harder to work with the people who most need our help. We must always grasp new insights and learn from new experiences. This is even more vital in the 80s as we work with the dispossessed, the exploited, and the hopeless.
Oxfam has learned much from the experience of the past 40 years. Not only how best to help the dispossessed, the exploited, the hopeless, but why these circumstances exist for them. Telling people here at home, helping them to understand the facts and issues, is vital to the role of Oxfam today. Supporters' conferences, speakers, films and slide sets, newspapers, publications to suit the needs of all age groups, bringing the message to the public generally. More specialized aids are available to help teachers explain and educate the young about the world in which they are growing up. Since 1964, when this work started, a whole generation of children have grown up, many with a real understanding of the wider world and a desire to help bring about change. But the problems and aspirations of the Third World are not always easy to explain and can become controversial. Clear statements are needed, which dispel false assumptions, wrong perspectives, and incorrect facts. To this end, a public affairs unit was created in the 70s to look deeply into some, at least, of the major issues of the day, and to bring their findings to the notice of those who govern the country's affairs and have the power to influence national and international policies. At about the same time, Oxfam tried simpler ways of bringing home to people complicated issues. Not an easy task, not a popular one. Conditioned maybe by the old starving child image, many donors felt it wrong use of their money to place ads like these in the nation's press. And yet they were dealing undeniably with some of the fundamental issues that still underlie the deprivation, the oppression, and the suffering of the poor world. And this campaigning spirit has increased in importance. While always present in Oxfam, in 1978 a major event took place to stir the public. A move against poverty, an invitation to take sides and be counted among those who challenge the existing order of things, an order or disorder which will not be corrected by money alone, but needs knowledge and sympathetic understanding, the will to fight for reform, and the determination to change attitudes in our own country. In the 1980s, Oxfam will focus on specific problems facing the poor world. One such has been child health, not just the obvious need for health services, but the ethics, for instance, of Western firms promoting baby foods to mothers who can't read the vital instructions on the tin or have no clean water to mix the contents. Another focus has been on the ethics of Western drug firms who push complex and expensive medicines to countries whose peoples can ill afford to buy them, or where powerful elites in these countries get rich on the backs of the poor. The Move Against Poverty campaign was more than an event. It symbolized the conviction that in the 80s, Oxfam must grow as a pressure on society to challenge preconceived ways of thinking, to uncover the failures and omissions in our own way of life, to call in question the attitudes and dealings of the developed nations with poorer countries, and above all, to reflect the changing emphases of Oxfam's work with its partners overseas. But none of this would be at all possible without the dedication and practical effort of Oxfam's fundraising groups and individual supporters. The many thousands throughout the country who help meet the perpetual and increasing need for hard cash in time-honored ways, and in some ways that are less conventional. One particular contribution, with a history going back 25 years, is the Pledged Gift Scheme. This offers individuals a personal way of giving long-term and continuous support through Oxfam, and often makes many friends in the process.
It's really a question of getting a small group of people who will pledge themselves to giving a regular sum every week or month to help in Oxfam's work overseas. People round about, or at the office or factory, anywhere in fact. You call on them to take their gift and hand over a news sheet about what Oxfam is doing at the moment.
Another and more recent initiative centres on visits to bank managers and solicitors by retired ex-colleagues to explain the importance to Oxfam of covenants and bankers' orders. The return from this work is now substantial and a major source of income. Backing all the many and varied activities of Oxfam's supporters is the organising staff, the sharp end of the charity's workforce. Men and women skilled and experienced in drawing and holding people together and guiding their endeavours. Working in regional teams spread throughout the United Kingdom and Ireland, they carry the main responsibility for representing Oxfam to the public at large and putting its policies into effect. The backbone of their fundraising operation is the Oxfam shop. This is the first and original one in Broad Street, Oxford. Opened in 1947 as a means of selling gifts not easily transferable to the refugee camps of Europe, it still operates today and is one of nearly 700 throughout the country. One shop leader recalled the early days.
The first shop we had in this town was fairly primitive in comparison. Just a few trestle tables and rails which we managed to borrow. But gradually things began to improve as we moved to better premises. Most of the things for sale are donated by the public. The remainder are goods brought from many third world countries. These goods have a special significance.
And that significance lies in the concept behind them. Here, in the slums of Nairobi, a handful of women make baskets, which will eventually end up in Oxfam's shops. The women have no income other than what they earn from this modest project. In providing them with work, Oxfam gives employment where none would exist, supplies an attractive range of products to the public here, and creates profits to further its aims and work. The basket makers of Nairobi are but one example. To the warehouse in Oxfordshire come handicrafts from groups and cooperatives all over the world, and also from handicapped people in our own country. By these projects, Oxfam tries to serve both at home and overseas. Apart from the business of selling, Oxfam has developed its own initiatives in the field of conservation and recycling. This clothing from an Oxfam shop is being dispatched to Huddersfield, where Oxfam has a small warehouse called the Waste Saver Unit. Started in 1974, the project originally dealt with metal, glass and paper, as well as textiles. Today it concentrates on aluminium and textiles, and receives about 100 tons each week from Oxfam shops throughout the country to be processed and sold to the trade. In the beginning, minutes were kept in a threepenny notebook. The Constitution read, "The relief to the extent that the law for the time being permits of famine and sickness arising as a result of the war." 40 years on, that same principle would apply. But now the extended family of Oxfam, in all its many and diverse roles, is committed to a wider view, the essential dignity of people, and their capacity to overcome the problems and pressures which can crush or exploit them, whether through climate or geography, or the economic, political, or social conditions of their lives. Oxfam is a partnership of people. Guy Stringer, Deputy Director General.
Some summers ago, I was in northwest Bangladesh, where this seeker comes from. And I was staying with a farmer who was on an Oxfam-supported training program growing the new rices. When I left, he and his wife gave me a treat breakfast. And I thanked him for his generosity and kindness. And to my astonishment, he replied, "My friend, when the sun rises, it rises for everyone." And that, to my mind, is a marvellous description of Oxfam's aims and hopes. We're members of one family. We want a sense of brotherliness, a feeling that together we can use in a better way the shrinking resources of this tiny globe. And the poor deserve our help. They are so sturdy, so vigorous, and so brave. Look at these poor women on the Somali border trying to bring up their children with every hope for decency against every known difficulty. There's no clean water, there's no sanitation, there's bilharzia in the only lake, and their crops are attacked by pests and marauding monkeys. But yet they try so hard. They have the skills of an English VSO nurse who has to be industrious and tough against a difficult and dangerous environment. When with Oxfam friends, I was struggling in Kampuchea to make some contribution to the relief of those desperate people, the father of our pretty interpreter wrote for me a proverb, and this is what it said: "A good friend is to be found when one is poor." I hope that Oxfam may continue to justify that accolade. Join us. Our cause is just, and you will not regret the decision, and nor will someone else somewhere.